After this short introduction, good morning again. So I will be talking today about quantum random oracles. And let me first tell you about random oracles in German. So we forget quantum for the moment, and we will try to understand what random oracles are about in classical cryptography. So, a random oracle is basically an idealization of a hash function. So, a hash function in cryptographic practice, but not in theory, but in cryptographic practice, is a function that is constructed to behave as randomly as possible. So, you take a lot of logical gates, put them together in some way that should ensure that there is basically no understandable connection between the inputs and the outputs of that function. And now you can define a lot of properties of hash functions. The most well-known one is probably collision resistance, which says that you cannot find two inputs that give the same output. But basically all these properties don't capture the intuition that a hash function is just a random mess. And perhaps sometimes in a proof we would like to use the fact that a hash function is basically a random mess. So this is where the random oracle comes in. With a random oracle we say, since a hash function is basically just some random stuff, let's just formalize this fact. Let's just say, we analyze our protocol, but instead of using a hash function, we use a totally random function. And then we analyze the protocol using a totally random function, which turns out to be much easier in many cases. Or there are some protocols which we can only prove in that model. And then we use the following heuristic, which I call the random oracle heuristic. If the protocol is secure when it actually uses a random function instead of the hash function, then the protocol is also secure using a real-life hash function, so that's something like SHA-3 that's actually used in practice. Now, it's important to note that this is really a heuristic, so it is not true that it's not something you can prove. It is actually something you can disprove in general. So there are weirdly constructed protocols that violate the random oracle heuristic. So you can make a protocol that is secure using a random oracle, but becomes insecure no matter which hash function you plug in. So, for some people, this is a total killer argument against the random oracle, and they don't use it because it's wrong. However, in practice, it has shown that, well, I don't know of any real-life protocol where these things happen. So, for like protocols you would use in real life, in industry, it's probably better to have a random oracle proof than no proof at all. Because so far, for all practical purposes, the random oracle heuristic has worked. So this is basically the whole idea and motivation behind the random oracle. It is there to make our proofs easier by replacing a hash function by a totally random function. And I mean, totally random functions have a lot of advantages. For example, all the outputs are stochastically independent, which is not true with any existing function. A side note is, unsoundness in general comes from the mismatch in the models that with a hash function, you know a description of a short circuit that computes it, and with the random oracle, there is no short circuit that describes it. So you make use of that by constructing some protocols that basically prove that they know the circuit to construct, to do that. So they know the description of a circuit for the hash function. If they don't know it, then you're in the random oracle. So you can easily recognize the protocols that try to distinguish those two because they usually have an explicit proof of knowing a circuit in them. But the topic of my talk today is not the pros and cons of the random oracle model. That would unfortunately go too far time-wise. We will assume now that we want to analyze a protocol in the random oracle model, and we will look at how this is to be done. And first I will look at it in the classical case by an example, and then we will see what changes in the quantum setting, because in the quantum setting, as usual, there are a lot of extra challenges here. So first, let me say somewhat more formally what the random oracle model is. Formally is perhaps a bit of a joke, because it will be very formal, but a bit more. So the random oracle is a randomly chosen function. So by randomly chosen, I always mean uniformly randomly chosen from the set of all functions. A uniformly randomly chosen function h. Let's do an experiment. And in the analysis of the protocol, we say that all algorithms, including the adversary, this is important, have oracle access to H. Why do we model it that way? Well, the thing is that a hash function in real life can be computed by everyone. So if we have a random function that models the hash function, we need that everyone can actually evaluate that function. And if we would base a protocol on the assumption that the adversary cannot even compute the hash function, that would be clearly a very silly assumption. So we have to give oracle access to the hash function / random oracle, to the adversary, and to anyone else who needs it. And then we show that the protocol is secure even if the adversary has this oracle access. By oracle access, I just mean that, for example, if you describe the adversary as a circuit, there's one extra gate that just evaluates that random function. And this is what I just called formally. It won't get more formal than that in terms of this definition. Instead, I will continue with an example of a protocol that can be analyzed in the random oracle model, and which, if we want to analyze outside the random oracle model, it's kind of impossible, or at least you need much stronger assumptions on the rest of the things. So you can implement it with some hash function, but then everything gets complicated. And it's the so-called full domain hash signatures. So we assume a trapdoor one-way function f. So we have seen one-way functions in one of the talks here. It's just a function if you see the output of a random input, you can't find a corresponding input. And trapdoor means that actually they come with a public and a secret key. The secret key is called trapdoor. So if you know the secret key, you can invert it. If you don't know the secret key, you cannot. That's the rough idea. I'm not going to define anything formally today because there are so many things that I will just try to give you the intuition. But all what I can say here can of course be formalized. And then if we want to sign a message M, what we do is we we call the signing algorithm with the message M. I leave the public key here, the secret key here implicit. And the signature of M is the one-way function inverted applied to the hash of M. Yeah, and we can invert this function F here because we have this trapdoor. Yeah, so who wants to sign knows the secret key, he knows the trapdoor, he can invert hash of M. Who doesn't know the trapdoor, that's the intuition, cannot apply F to the -1, and therefore he cannot compute such a signature. Of course that wasn't a proof, it was just showing that the most obvious way of attacking doesn't work. And if we have a signature and a message M and we want to verify it, of course we can't call F to the -1 because we don't have the secret key. But what we can check is whether F applied to the signature equals hash of the message. Yeah, this checks whether we have actually computed it that way, and we assume that only the honest sender can do that. And now we would like to see whether this signature scheme is secure. And what we show is what is called unforgeability. Again, I won't give a formal definition, but roughly it means you cannot, even if you have access, even if you can get signatures from whichever message you want, you cannot produce a signature for any other message than those that you have right. So imagine I get signatures for a lot of messages, like, I don't know, a lot of bank transactions. It shouldn't mean that just by seeing signed bank transactions by you, I would be able to forge another bank transaction by you. So this is the notion that we want to achieve. And I will sketch how the proof is done. So first we assume that there is an adversary that breaks the unforgeability. So what the adversary does is the adversary creates a forgery, so a message and a corresponding signature, which he shouldn't know. So it's any message that he hasn't actually asked to be signed. Additionally, he has access to a signing oracle, so he can ask the signing oracle for a signature of any message, except he can't ask the one that he outputs in the end. And we said in the random oracle model, we give the adversary access to any, we give the adversary access to the random oracle. So this is the situation that we have when the adversary attacks this key. And what we want to do in order to prove security is to translate or to transform this forging adversary into an algorithm that manages to invert the function f, because our assumption must be that the function f is a one-way function, so that we cannot invert it. So if we manage to transform this adversary into an inverter, we have shown that assuming the hardness of the one-way function, this adversary could not have existed in the first place. And let's call this inverter B, because B is the letter after A. So what does B do? Let's see whether I can keep the picture here before we So what does the algorithm B do? Well, the input is some f of x. As again, I assume the public key is known to everyone and I'm not explicitly writing it. But the x is not known. So he gets f of x for some unknown value x, and his task is to find x, because then he has broken the one-way function. And he does it as follows. He has to use now the adversary A in order to somehow attack f. So he runs A, but instead of giving A the normal oracle sig and h for the random signature oracle and a random oracle, he gives simulated oracles, sig tilde and h tilde. So he needs to simulate somehow the signing oracle because he doesn't know the secret key, so he can't just run the signing oracle normally. He needs to somehow come up with a way to give the adversary something that looks like the signing oracle but isn't, because he can't construct the signing oracle. And with the random oracle, he also needs to produce a simulated one. Not necessarily, we could put the honest one in, but then the proof won't work. So we'll put a different fake random oracle in, which is used to trick the adversary A into revealing the inverse of f of x. So let's see how these two simulations work. So if we have a query h tilde of y, so whenever the adversary queries h tilde of y, now the algorithm B needs to come up with a suitable answer. And what we do is we pick some ry, some random value ry, and we return h tilde of y to be f of ry. So what have we done here? Instead of normally the random oracle would just return a random value, but here instead we return a random value with the one-way function applied to it. Actually, there was a mistake. It means trapdoor one-way needs to be a permutation, otherwise the proof doesn't hold. So it's a random value ry with a permutation applied to it, so that's just a random value. So the behavior of this oracle hasn't changed at all. Yeah, there's no difference. However, now the algorithm B knows a pre-image for every output of the random oracle, and that will become very important. Except the adversary picks random, the algorithm B picks randomly one query in which he does things differently, namely to the at some point when he's queried on some input, say y0, he just returns f of x instead of f of x ry. And this is a very different thing. The distribution, it's still something random. But here, f of x is something he knows, but he doesn't know x, because f of x was the thing it was his challenge, so he wants to invert f of x. So you know, as a random oracle where he answers things, often he answers with things where he knows the pre-image, and on one query he answers with the thing where he wants to know the pre-image. And the signing oracle works as follows. When we are queried for some message n, so for the signature, we return the value Rn. Remember, for every random numerical input we chose a value Ry, so for input m we have Rm, and we know that Rm by construction is f to the minus 1 of h tilde of m. So that is a valid signature, because we picked all the inputs like this. There is a possibility that the adversary happens to make a signing query on the input that we picked this way. This will give us a certain error in the simulation, but it turns out that this probability is small enough that it won't ruin everything, so we will assume that it always happens like this. So this is indistinguishable because we chose our oracles to nicely mimic, to use the same distributions as the original oracles. However, now the algorithm B has extra information that is useful for it. So this thing here we did not because for breaking something, but in order to be able to produce the signing oracle, because we can't evaluate f to the minus 1, so we need to construct all random oracle values such that we already know f to the minus 1 of that oracle value. And this query will be used in a moment for actually getting the inverse of f. So if A produces a forgery, so a message in the signature, then with some probability we have that m equals the query y0. So we can show without loss of generality the adversary must have queried m at some point, and then with probability like 1 over the number of queries, it will have been the query where we answered that way. And then we know that since this has to be a valid signature, that f of the signature equals hash of the message, which is hash of y0, which is f of x. And this gives us a contradiction because this means we have found a pre-image sigma of f of x, and this was something we can't do. So this was the proof of security of full domain hash in the random oracle model. Yeah.
So we said that we give all parties access to the random oracle.
Yes.
But we actually, when we build the proof, we give the challenger full control over this.
Yes.
Random oracle. Isn't it like this is one other reason why we decide on the oracle? We assume that the person is telling us about all the hash that he wants to do in real life. We're actually having to.
Yeah, well, people do criticize it on that aspect, but you can see that this is just a trick in the proof. The final statement does not actually refer to any such controls. So basically what we are showing here, by a contradiction proof that involves these weird things, we are proving that for any random function that is given to everyone and which no one can tweak, it is impossible to forge a signature. And no one is tweaking something. This tweaking here is some hypothetical counterexample thing. So if you could break it for a random function, then using a similar algorithm, you could also break it. You could also break in a non-random oracle model, you could break the character function. So this is basically what is done here. But it all boils down to a matter of taste because we don't have proofs. I mean, we don't have proofs that the random oracle model is a good thing. That's a decision one has to kind of make on feeling. I claim it works in practice, but I can't claim it. No. So now we come to the quantum. That's another question.
Does this mean that we have an only exponentially small probability that we break the one-way function?
No, it just means that does this mean that we have only an exponentially small probability to break the one-way function? No, it means that the probability of breaking the one-way function and is closely related to the probability of breaking the signature scheme. So if the probability of breaking the one-way function is exponentially small, then the probability of breaking the signature scheme is also very small. I'm not sure exactly, I mean, I would have to look at the reduction a bit more in detail to see how much it drops. There are some details there, but basically it means small probability goes to small probability, but that could be in any range. If the one-way function is already relatively hard to break but not exponentially hard, then the signature scheme will be relatively hard to break but not exponentially hard. Okay, the quantum random oracle. So, how do we do the same thing in the quantum setting? So now we assume we have a quantum adversary. What do we need to change in this model? So the first try one could do is say the random oracle is a random function as before, and the adversary has access to a classical oracle for H. So that means that the adversary can, for any value, well, he can measure some register, get the value x, and ask what H of x is. But he cannot compute it in superposition. Now, this is, I'm mentioning it not because that's what we will do, but because it's a bad idea. Why is it a bad idea? The thing is that in the real world, where we use a hash function, the adversary can compute the hash function in superposition on many inputs. So you could, for example, run a browser search on the hash function, or a, that's the best example probably. So he will actually reduce his runtime by a square root factor because he can use the, because it has superposition access. So if in the random oracle model we forbid superposition access, we let the adversary only very classically, he cannot do that, and we have a big mismatch that goes beyond the unsoundness that we already know. And then you can, for example, construct relatively easily a protocol which has a certain, well, where it holds in the random oracle model that the adversary cannot do something in time t, while in the classical model he can break the protocol in time t. He can only not break, it's only that in time, in the random oracle model, it would take time t to break something, while with a real hash function it would take time square root of t, because you can use global. So this we want to avoid. Now you may say, well, t versus square root of t, if we're thinking only of polynomial time, it doesn't make a difference. Is there a better example? No easy one actually. I was thinking yesterday whether there is one, but I couldn't find an easy one. There are examples, so relative to some oracles, we can prove that Fischlein's zero-knowledge proof with online extractors is insecure with access to any hash function, but secure with respect to a classical access random oracle, but that would that is a very complex example that needs heavy techniques to show, so it's not something I can show you, unfortunately. So I just say, get an idea. And if you're very interested about that, you can catch me later or write me an email. And then I can give you some pointers. So let me do the second try then. And that one should be pretty obvious, given what I said here, that we need superposition access. The random oracle is still a random function h, but A has access to an oracle that computes the following unitary. So it maps xy to x, y XOR hash of x. And if you remember, for example, yesterday the talk about query complexity, that's exactly the same model how it was done there. We have black box access to some function in exactly this way, and we asked how long does it take to find out something about the function. Except that there the function was not necessarily a random function, but a function with some properties depending on the setting, while here it's always a uniformly randomly chosen function. So this is the quantum random oracle model. Now we can already observe the first result about the quantum random oracle model is the optimality of Grover's algorithm implies that the random oracle is a one-way function. Well, there's a bit of a gap here because it's only if you do the optimality proof for uniformly random functions, but if we ignore those distinctions, it's basically the same thing, saying optimality of Grover means finding a pre-image takes time square root of n, where n is the number of possible inputs to the hash function, and that's exponential time still, so it means we cannot invert the hash function. So we see the random oracle does at least have some properties that it has in the classical setting. But what you also see is things are more difficult, because the proof of optimality of Grover is much harder than the classical proof that you cannot find a pre-image of the random oracle. Well, we just know it already holds, so it's not difficult for us. But the level of difficulty of these proofs is very different. And this is something we have to expect all the time in the quantum random oracle model. It's more difficult most of the time. So can we prove anything else? Can we actually use it for something nicer than just showing it's a one-way function? I mean, if we would have wanted just a one-way function, we wouldn't have started using the random oracle, we would have assumed that our hash function is a one-way function, which is a much weaker assumption. So this fact on its own is rather useless. And we have one big problem when using the quantum random oracle. Lazy sampling does not work. Now you will ask, what is lazy sampling? Because I forgot to mention the name when I used it, so let's go back here. So here in this algorithm, we have this that whenever the adversary queries the random oracle, at that moment we come up with an answer to his question. So it's not a function that is fixed in the very beginning of the execution. Instead, it's a function that we fill up as we go along. Each time we are queried, we just need to make up an answer make up what the function output is on that particular input. And for example, what's easy to show is if you answer randomly on each query, this is indistinguishable from a random function that had been chosen in the very beginning. So this thing is lazy sampling. It refers to the fact that we we decide on the random oracle values as we go along, whenever they're needed. And this is a very powerful technique because sometimes, I mean, it's not used in a very powerful way here, but sometimes it allows us, for example, to change random oracle values based on later information that we haven't had in the beginning of the execution, because we can make sure that the adversary will not query that into that particular position before we reach that point, so we can still change our mind and change values later and so on, all because we choose the values in a step-by-step fashion, so we can even choose them adaptively based on what the adversary does. And this lazy sampling technique does not work with the quantum random oracle. Why? The adversary can just take the state, the superposition over all x in the first register, normalization factors omitted. This goes to a superposition of x and hash of x. This costs him one query, and he has queried the whole oracle. So if we would try to do some lazy sampling that decides on values as they go along, this would now have had to fix the whole oracle, so there's no point in doing lazy sampling, or at least it's not clear what it would mean. And this is a big loss, because without lazy sampling, most of the things that we do when using the random oracle in the classical setting break down, go away. So for example, in one of the first paper, in the first paper that made the quantum oracle really explicit in terms of definition, for example, in the introduction we have a list of things where it's not clear anymore how we do it, and I think it's nice to mention them. This paper was, when was the paper? It was in 2011. So this list is in 2011. So it's actually interesting to look whether I changed, whether they're still all open, and actually we made some slight progress on some. So one thing mentioned was adaptive programming. So we change the values of the random oracle based on things that happened in the protocol before. Doesn't seem to be possible without choosing them as we go along. So seems that that's very hard. Then extracting. So what we often do is we get the queries from the adversary while we go along, and then we learn what he's queried, and from this information we can somehow get information that is useful for performing the proof. This is also difficult now, because the adversary might do queries like this or other superpositions. We can't measure them, because then we would not give the right answer. He might, for example, check whether he still gets a superposition back. So doing extraction based on the queries the adversary makes seems very hard as well. Then there is the question, can we simulate the random oracle itself efficiently? So even if we are not wanting to change it or something, is it possible to make an algorithm that produces a random oracle? That kind of sounds a bit weird, but the thing is, if we just say we pick a random function and then we give you an oracle, this means the first step is picking a random function which has exponentially many entries. So we cannot do that, even also classically. We can't say, I now pick the description of this function, because even describing it needs exponential space. Instead, you pick the values as you go along. This is indistinguishable from just having picked a random function, but it's polynomial time. But quantumly, we cannot pick the values as we go along, so we would have to pick the whole random function in one go at the beginning, but that's not polynomial time, so that would actually not be allowed. The question is, can we somehow get around that? Or perhaps is it that an algorithm with oracle access to a random function is actually more powerful than an algorithm without oracle access to a random function? Not clear what a random function will give you, but perhaps you can solve NP-hard problems just by having a random function. It's not the case, but it's not easy to see that it's not the case. And then there's one technique that's really nasty. I call it rewinding with reprogramming. So you run the adversary with a random oracle, and then you rewind him like we did yesterday, to another point, and then you give different answers. So starting from some query, you give different answers than you gave before. Also, that means that you have the queries nicely separated and so on. So these were the 4 points that were listed in this paper. So let me tell you quickly what has changed. So we have slightly recovered the adaptive programming, so there are specific cases where we can adaptively change the random oracle a little bit, but we still don't have any very general way of doing that. Extracting, it's almost no. We have some extreme cases. Basically, there is an example where it works if the output of the random oracle is as long as the input, then you can do extracting by treating the random oracle as a random permutation, but it's that's almost cheating, I think. I can say that it's almost cheating because I did it. Efficient simulation of the random oracle, actually that's solved. So it turns out that if you do only Q queries, you can't tell a random oracle apart from for example, a polynomial of degree 2Q, so that's a nice trick. And rewinding with reprogramming, I don't know that there's anything. So that would be, for example, for Fiat-Shamir, which is an interesting, for proving the security of Fiat-Shamir, which is an interesting challenge here. So, after telling you all these troublesome dreary stories about the random oracle, let me give you some good news by showing you a few things that work and showing you what kinds of techniques we can use with the random oracle. So for example, what we can do is we can analyze full domain hash, the scheme we had a look at just before, in the quantum random oracle model. So recall what was the problem we had somewhere. Yeah. We had the problem that we did this lazy evaluation of the random oracle where we decide on things step by step. And then we, well, this is something we can't do. So this is the one proof step that we need to change. All the rest, well, there are a lot of details then afterwards that are difficult, but forgetting the intuition of the proof, this is the one thing we need to find out how to do differently. So let me tell you. Actually, let me copy this so that we can see it. Let's see whether I can copy things. What? Oh. Oh. Okay. We've managed that. So this was the classical situation. So in the quantum setting, we need to somehow change that. So, how do we change the construction of the random oracle? So we pick first we pick a random function t. So this will not be our random oracle, but it's also a random function distributed like a random oracle. And this, well, as I said, this is exponential time, but we can with the technique I mentioned that you can simulate a random oracle, we can actually get rid of this step. So for simplicity, we just assume now that we can pick a random function. And then we define random oracle h tilde on input y to be f of t of y. Now that's the same as what we did here in the first step. It means for every input y, there's an independently random ry that we would get as an answer. So ty is like the ry above. It's a uniformly random value, and f of t of y is uniformly is f of something uniform, so it's uniform. So now you may ask, why can we do that? So why? How did we get rid of the lazy sampling? Well, we have constructed this random function, and you can think of it as a pseudo-random function, so something we've just constructed, one has a key, and then given a circuit for t, which we can do if we have implemented t as like a polynomial or pseudo-random function, then we can build a circuit for h tilde, because we just need to make the circuit for the composition of two functions. So if we can compute t in superposition, we can compute f in superposition, then we can also compute h tilde in superposition, and that means we can simulate the random oracle. So it turns out we cannot do lazy sampling, but we can do this kind of this sampling where we cheat in how we sample the values, but kind of in a way that doesn't depend on any data we get. We kind of in the beginning specify the dependence of the values of h tilde from the values of some random function t, and this samples the whole oracle in one go, and that's possible. This is, for example, what's done in a technique called history-free reductions, which is a characterization of some signature scheme constructions that work in the random oracle model, in the quantum random oracle. But I'm not going to try to generalize it here, I do it just on one example. Unfortunately, that's not all. So far, if you wouldn't have this except on one very part, we would have managed to get the random oracle. Well, now we have a good simulation of the random oracle, we can simulate the signing oracle, everything works. So this is already a nice trick for working with the random oracle. And if we increase the assumptions on the function f, so not just a one-way trapdoor permutation, but something called the pre-merge sampleable trapdoor function, then actually this trick is all we need, but the rest of the proof is more complex. But I want to show you another trick, which allows us to to really do the same as in this construction. Let me tell you what the difficulty here is. I mean, it sounds simple. We just pick a random y0 and we build a function h that is not always this, but it's the function that makes a case distinction for one particular value. It gives us the input f of x we want to invert. So why can we not do that? Well, the thing is, if we pick just one particular place, one particular input, the probability that the adversary will use that one is exponentially small. So classically, it wasn't that we picked y0 randomly. We picked y0 randomly out of the polynomially many values that the adversary asked for. And that's only possible if we do lazy sampling. If we don't do lazy sampling, we can't pick out of the values the adversary queries, because you could do queries like this one, where he queries exponentially many. So how can we now try to reprogram the position that he hopefully will use in the end to make our forgery in a way that he will actually hit it, at least with some probability. So, for this we need to slightly extend this, so this does not work. We need to somehow put the challenge output in this thing. So we will do it slightly differently. We additionally pick a set S, which is a subset of the domain of the random oracle. So we pick a subset of the positions of the random oracle of density lambda. So we don't pick the whole random oracle, we don't pick all outputs, but we don't pick just one. We pick a reasonable fraction of the inputs, not too many, not too few. And then we define the random oracle to be either f of t of y, if y is not in this small but not too small fraction, and it outputs f of x if y is in this fraction. And now a lemma by Unruh tells us that a random function with an output fixed in many places, in lambda many places, so in some fraction of the oracle we fix it to one output and always the same, but the rest is a random function. Looks somewhat random. So it doesn't exactly look like a random function. There's some chance that he notices that there are two outputs that are the same, but at least the probability of distinguishing is not too high. And now if we do all of this quantitatively, we see that the proof goes through. So this thing, with some probability, we will get the adversary will use this one for his forgery and will not notice that there are many of these values planted in there. So that's one way of getting a quantum replacement for putting a challenge into one random query. So this is an important technique. So this shows that full domain hash is secure. And now let me very quickly sketch a different example. Unfortunately, I have very little time, so I can sketch only very shortly. Just to give you a feeling that there are many different techniques that can be used. Now we have an encryption scheme. So if we want to encrypt a message, what we do is, again, we use this trapdoor function, and to encrypt the message M, we apply the trapdoor function to, which uses the public key, to some random value. Yeah. Okay. And then we also use of this random value as a kind of one-time pad to one-time pad the message. And now we want to show that this is has NCPA security or semantic security in the quantum random oracle model. So the intuition here is that h of r looks, classically, until you've queried h of r, this is like a random value, so this is like a one-time pad. And you cannot query r without first finding out r, which means querying this thing. That's the intuition. Can we do something like that in the quantum setting? So, yes, indeed, we can use something which I call the one-way to hiding lemma, which turns out useful in a lot of situations. and there are even some extensions of it that do a limited adaptive reprogramming of the random oracle, so it's a, well, I'm bragging here because I did that one, but I find this a powerful technique. So what does this lemma say? It says if you have two settings, one setting is some algorithm B with random oracle x is h, and it gets input x and h of x, well, let's say r and h of r, to make it match the variables above, and a setting B, where this algorithm gets r and just some random y, so two random values. These settings are indistinguishable, so the algorithm B cannot tell the difference in which one he is, up to a probability epsilon, where epsilon is related to the probability that when running when measuring the H query in game B at a random point, so we execute this game and at some random moment we just stop it and measure what the input to the random oracle was. So the probability of actually getting R that way. So it's these are related in some way. So the one-way to hiding lemma basically says you cannot distinguish a hash of some value from a random value without actually querying the random oracle at some point on that value. Well, that sounds very obvious, but one needs to prove that. I'm not going to prove that, I'm going to show you how it applies here. So let's say BH of RY runs an adversary that attacks this scheme. using an encryption scheme that is defined almost like this, namely it chooses here instead of using h of r, it uses y, but the rest is the same. So in this game, the adversary cannot attack the security because m is one-time padded with y, and y is uniformly random. But this is epsilon close to bh of r, h of x, which runs the adversary with the encryption scheme like this, because instead of y, it got the input h of r. And now we are in the original setting. So we have that the setting where this one query is replaced by m by y is indistinguished from the one where it's still a random oracle. So that's the original setting. And by the one-way to hiding lemma, the difference between these two settings is bounded by the probability that when we abort b to the h at some point, we get the value r. Not sure what happened there. But this execution of this game, there R is used only as an argument to f. So getting R is the probability of getting R in this game is negligible because f is a one-way function. So we cannot actually find R. And this shows that there's no attack in, somehow it's not operating that I want at the moment, in the original setting. And that shows the security of this scheme here. Not this scheme, of this scheme. So I had to rush through these proof sketches a bit because this is a kind of, well, getting this all in all the details is quite some work, but I wanted to give you an impression of what kind of things can be done in the numerical model and what the challenges are. And I will send around, or send through Tommaso actually, a little handout which lists like the literature references for all the things I mentioned. So if you are interested in any of those techniques in more detail, you will find where to find it. So thank you for your attention.